Underneath the surface of Europe's familiar institutions, a quiet but undeniable transformation is unfolding. It does not arrive with the noise of sudden collapse or the shock of revolution, but instead flows like a slow current, steady, persistent, and powerful. Step by step, nation by nation, countries that once tied their future, almost exclusively to the European Union, are beginning to turn their gaze elsewhere. That gaze stretches eastward and southward, toward a coalition that only a decade ago was underestimated, even dismissed, but which today is emerging as a gravitational center of global politics, BRICS. Born as an economic partnership between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS has grown into far more than a convenient acronym. It has become a serious counterweight to the post-Cold War order, challenging institutions that have long been dominated by the West. Where once it was perceived as symbolic, today it is strategic. Its appeal is not just economic but philosophical, representing sovereignty, multipolarity, and independence in a world weary of rigid hierarchies and imposed conditions. And Europe is no longer standing apart. It is quietly, cautiously, and increasingly openly taking notice. Among the countries drifting in this new direction, Turkey is the most striking. With a history that stretches across empires and a geography that binds together continents, Turkey embodies paradox and possibility. It is simultaneously European and Asian, Islamic and secular, Western-leaning yet fiercely protective of its independence. For decades, its ambition was clear: membership in the European Union. To that end, Turkey restructured its economy, modernized its legal frameworks, and reshaped its governance. But time and again, its aspirations ran aground on Europe's political caution. Negotiations dragged, promises faded, skepticism grew, and Turkey was left with a message that could not be ignored. You are welcome to approach, but not to fully belong. It is against this backdrop that Ankara's announcement of interest in joining BRICS carries such weight. It is more than economics. It is strategy, symbolism, and sovereignty. BRICS offers Turkey something Europe never truly did: a seat at the table as an equal, not as a perpetual candidate. A platform where decisions are not dictated but shared, where cooperation does not come with demands for ideological alignment. For Turkey, positioned on critical maritime routes and at the crossroads of global energy corridors, this is not simply advantageous, it is transformative. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has left little ambiguity. BRICS is a path toward asserting Turkey's independence in a multipolar world where no single hegemon calls the shots. This does not mean abandoning Europe. Turkey's trade with the EU remains vast, exceeding $200 billion annually. But what is shifting is posture. No longer dependent, no longer willing to bend indefinitely to an invitation that may never come, Turkey is diversifying its alliances. It is hedging in a volatile world, balancing old partnerships with new ones, and seeking opportunities where preconditions and political strings do not dictate progress. Turkey is not alone. Serbia, long tethered to the slow machinery of EU accession, is facing its own moment of reckoning. Since receiving candidate status in 2012, it has adapted laws, reformed systems, and made concessions. Yet the door to Brussels remains half-closed. The stumbling block Kosovo is not just a diplomatic obstacle but a matter of national identity. For Serbia, recognizing Kosovo's independence is not an acceptable condition for progress. And so, as frustration deepens, Belgrade looks outward. Where the EU demands compliance, BRICS offers flexibility. Where Brussels insists on preconditions, BRICS emphasizes mutual respect. Serbia's leadership has voiced growing dissatisfaction. Vice Prime Minister Aleksandar Vulin has condemned what he sees as endless conditions with little reward, contrasting the EU's rigid demands with Russia's consistency. Moscow, unlike Brussels, has never asked Serbia to betray its history or abandon its allies. BRICS reflects that same ethos of autonomy, making it a natural draw. Serbia's upcoming presence at the next BRICS summit underscores this shift, not yet membership, but a clear signal of interest. This trend stretches far beyond Turkey and Serbia. The United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, and Argentina are already deepening ties or joining outright. What was once seen as a club of rising economies is now a bloc expanding in both size and influence. It is no longer symbolic, it is systemic. It represents an alternative to the financial order of Washington and Brussels, one where nations can borrow, trade, and invest without surrendering sovereignty to external conditions. For countries caught between aspiration and exclusion, this matters profoundly. The European Union offers integration, but only through conformity, political, legal, and ideological. BRICS offers collaboration without conditions. That contrast is stark, and it explains why the bloc's gravitational pull grows stronger as the global order shifts. The international landscape is evolving. Western economies are slowing, weighed down by demographic decline and debt, while growth surges in Asia, Latin America, and parts of Africa. These are the regions driving the future, and BRICS connects directly into them. For Turkey, this means anchoring itself in new trade flows, new energy corridors, and new political arenas. For Serbia, it means diversifying exports, attracting investment, and engaging in global networks without endlessly waiting on Brussels. Even more critical is the financial transformation. For decades, the IMF and World Bank have set the rules of global development finance, attaching austerity, reforms, and oversight to their loans. To many countries, these conditions feel less like help and more like handcuffs. BRICS, through mechanisms such as the New Development Bank, is rewriting that playbook. Its financing comes with fewer conditions, tailored more to the realities of its members, and framed with respect for sovereignty. That difference is seismic. It represents not just an economic option, but a political statement. The era of Western financial monopoly is fading. The quiet transformation moving through Europe today is therefore not simply about economics. It is about identity, sovereignty, and the search for agency in a changing world. Turkey's pivot, Serbia's doubts, and the expanding influence of BRICS together form part of a larger story. The decline of a single-center order and the rise of a multipolar age. Would you like me to expand this even further into a full-length documentary script, like a 12-15-minute narration, cinematic in tone? Or should I keep pushing for a super dense, more dramatic written style that reads almost like a geopolitical novel? What we are witnessing in our time is not just another chapter in international politics. It is the slow but unmistakable rise of a new paradigm, a shift that is reshaping the very foundations of global affairs. This transformation is not about tearing down the West or overthrowing it in some dramatic confrontation. It is subtler, deeper, and far more consequential. It is about rebalancing a world that for decades has been locked into the gravitational pull of Western power. It is about creating new centers of influence, new platforms of cooperation, and new models of governance that reflect a multipolar reality rather than a unipolar dream. For countries like Turkey and Serbia, this shift carries special weight. Both have long histories of balancing between larger powers, navigating pressures, promises, and expectations. For them, BRICS is not merely a coalition, it is an opening. It is a chance to step onto the stage as equal participants in shaping a world order that no longer forces them to wait in line or beg for acceptance. It is a path toward economic growth, political autonomy, and regional influence without the endless conditions and doubts that come with Western-dominated institutions. In this sense, BRICS represents more than opportunity. It represents dignity. As the old alliances of the 20th century struggle under the weight of their own contradictions, BRICS has emerged with something striking. Not just a collection of economies, but a vision. A vision of partnership without coercion. Of cooperation without hierarchy. Of a global system where power is distributed, not monopolized. For nations left stranded in the waiting room of Western integration, countries that have knocked on the doors of Brussels or Washington for decades, this is a message that resonates deeply. It is a message that whispers of sovereignty restored, of respect earned, of futures no longer dictated by outsiders. The roots of BRICS trace back to Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, 5 nations that together embody both economic weight and political ambition. Yet from the beginning, BRICS was never just about economics. It was about independence. The creation of the New Development Bank and the Contingent Reserve Arrangement were not simple bureaucratic exercises. They were acts of defiance against a system dominated by the IMF and World Bank. They were statements that the Global South no longer had to live under conditional aid, austerity programs, and externally imposed reforms. Instead, here was a framework tailored for developing economies, responsive, flexible, and respectful of sovereignty. For Serbia, caught for decades between the West's promises and the East's opportunities, This is a lifeline. The EU has dangled membership as the ultimate prize: prosperity, legitimacy, stability. But in practice, the process has been slow, rigid, and often humiliating. Each step forward has been met with new demands, shifting benchmarks, and political disputes. Rule of law, media freedom, Kosovo, endless conditions that keep the door just out of reach. BRICS, in contrast, is not a club of preconditions. It is a coalition of equals. Serbia would not have to prove itself endlessly or surrender its sovereignty for a place at the table. Instead, it could engage on its own terms, pursue development aligned with national priorities, and escape the rigid frameworks imposed from Brussels. This is not an isolated shift. It is part of a broader movement. The BRICS nations are coordinating step by step to build a world where no single country, no single bloc, no single institution holds disproportionate power. Their unity is not based on ideology but on shared interest, the recognition that the Western-led order has served some at the expense of many. Each BRICS member brings something crucial: China's industrial might, India's demographic power, Brazil's resources, South Africa's gateway to the continent, and Russia's strategic and military weight. Together, they form a counterbalance too large to ignore. For smaller nations, the appeal is undeniable. In the past, they were often pawns on a chessboard controlled by superpowers. But BRICS offers a different kind of platform. It is not about being a subordinate ally. It is about being a partner in shaping the rules. For Serbia, long tugged back and forth between great powers, this represents freedom. Freedom to assert national interests, freedom to choose alliances, freedom to diversify economic and political ties without punishment. The momentum is building. BRICS is already considering expansion, with Turkey and Serbia among the names in serious discussion. This is more than arithmetic. Expansion would transform BRICS from a compact coalition into a sweeping network that stretches across continents, cultures, and geographies. Turkey brings the crossroads of Europe and Asia. Serbia brings the strategic heart of the Balkans. With every new member, BRICS adds weight, credibility, and leverage. With every new perspective, it becomes less an alternative and more a rival to the existing order. The contrast with the European Union is stark. For decades, the EU was the beacon, the promise of integration, prosperity, and modernity. But today, that promise is faltering. The accession process has become bogged down in bureaucracy, its criteria more political than practical. Serbia's journey toward EU membership has been marked by delay after delay, by shifting standards, and by tensions that seem designed less to include and more to postpone. What once looked like a golden door to the future now looks like an endless corridor. And in that corridor, the appeal of BRICS grows brighter. If the EU cannot adapt, if it cannot modernize its process, loosen its rigidity, and offer real immediate benefits, it risks ceding influence to a rising coalition that is proving more attractive by the day. But BRICS's growth is not only economic or institutional. It is also deeply personal, shaped by leadership, especially the role of Russia's Vladimir Putin. Putin has emerged as one of the architects of the BRICS vision, using Russia's resources, military clout, and geopolitical influence to strengthen the coalition. Under his leadership, BRICS has expanded its financial independence, built mechanisms to shield itself from sanctions, and moved to insulate members from Western pressure. But Putin's ambitions extend beyond finance. He has openly called for military and security cooperation within BRICS, joint exercises, intelligence sharing, and even the sketch of a collective security framework. In other words, a counterbalance not only to the IMF, but to NATO itself. His push to bring in countries like Turkey and Serbia is part of this broader strategy. The goal is to create not just a coalition of numbers but a coalition of depth, one with enough geographic breadth and strategic diversity to stand as a genuine alternative to the Western order. With Turkey and Serbia inside, BRICS would gain not only new markets but new gateways, into Europe, into the Mediterranean, into strategic crossroads long dominated by NATO and the EU. For Serbia, joining would mean stepping into history. It would mean aligning with a coalition that is not content to play by the old rules, but is determined to write new ones. It would mean accessing financing without strings, building partnerships across continents, and gaining a platform for regional leadership. Politically, it would be a decisive shift away from the EU-centered narrative of the past 2 decades, toward a more independent and diversified foreign. And yet, this is not just about Serbia. The growing interest from countries like Turkey and Serbia is a sign of something larger, a tectonic shift in global power. This is more than economics. It is a declaration that non-Western powers are rising, that the monopoly of the West is eroding, that the architecture of global governance is being redrawn. With leaders like Putin steering the course, and with member states aligning more closely in strategic interests, BRICS is moving from aspiration to reality. It is no longer a question of whether BRICS will matter, but how much it will matter. For countries searching for space in a world of shifting tides, BRICS offers a compelling vision. Partnership without subjugation, sovereignty without isolation, cooperation without humiliation. As BRICS grows in scope, in membership, in ambition, it is positioning itself as one of the most consequential coalitions of the 21st century. It is becoming a force not just in economics, but in politics, in security, in the very rules of international engagement. For nations that have waited too long on the sidelines, the age of waiting is over. The age of BRICS has begun.